Before the release of Attack of the Clones in 2002, prequel-era novels for adult audiences were few and far between. We saw one book released in 2002, The Approaching Storm, two books released in 2001, Darth Maul Shadowhunter and Cloak of Deception, both of which are set prior to The Phantom Menace, and only one book released in the year 2000, Rogue Planet. Demand for more information about the prequel era was high, but Lucasfilm was definitely keeping their cards close to their chest. Rogue Planet made it to number 9 on the New York Times bestseller list for 2 straight weeks, from the week of May 21st to May 28th, 2000, and was ultimately on the list for 5 weeks. Honestly, the only thing I remembered about Rogue Planet could best be summed up by this vine.
When I was in the 3rd grade, people treated me like a criminal because I killed somebody!
So, a brief summary. Dispatched to the mysterious world of Zonama Seacoast, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker are swept up in a deadly case of betrayal and intrigue. There are more secrets on Zonama Seacoast than meets the eye, but if they're not careful, this troubled young Jedi apprentice may find himself facing his deepest fear. So then, moving on to the characters. Rogue Planet is set 3 years after The Phantom Menace, so Anakin Skywalker is now 12 years old. He's learned a lot on his Jedi journey, but he still carries a lot of trauma from his childhood and his upbringing as a slave. I went back and forth between really liking what Bear was doing with Anakin's character and also feeling sometimes that he felt too old, or rather that his ultimate fate was a bit too heavily lampshaded. There are bits that felt just like Phantom Menace era Anakin. He's always saying that things are rugged, and in one case something is, yes, still wizard. He still has a childlike sense of excitement about new things and experiences. And I loved getting to see how excited he was to encounter everything on Zonama Seacoast and learn the process of how they make their ships. But at the same time, there were some parts that hinted too heavily at his eventual fall to the dark side. After The Phantom Menace, all we knew was that this cute little blonde boy was going to become Darth Vader. But we didn't know how. And so while I think that some of the things that Bear came up with in this book are logical, they would make sense from what you've seen in Phantom Menace, they don't exactly work super well with what we eventually learned in Attack of the Clones just 2 years later. Anakin's having nightmares, and I can't really see him as having had nightmares for years, because in Attack of the Clones it seemed like his nightmares about the death of his mother were a recent occurrence, and I would have thought if this poor child was just constantly having nightmares about things, that maybe the Jedi would have stepped in at some point. And then we also have the instance of Anakin's first kill. In the very first chapter, we're introduced to a new alien, a blood carver, who has specifically been sent to kill Anakin. Of course, that character does not disappear from the story, and he gets caught up in the intrigue that Tarkin and Raith Sienar are scheming about Zonama Seacoast. So in a pivotal scene near the end of the story, Anakin essentially uses the dark side to crush the insides of this blood carver alien. This is another bit where I'm not sure how that meshes with Attack of the Clones, because I also got the sense that Anakin hadn't really done anything dark side until he murdered all the Tuskens who had in turn kidnapped and tortured his mother. But I could see where, not knowing anything about the screenplay of Attack of the Clones, Bear would want to foreshadow Anakin's eventual fall. I just take issue with that because I think at this point in time, when he's only 12 years old, it's a little too heavy-handed for me. But then on the other hand, I really liked what Bear did with Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan is struggling to teach his young Jedi Padawan, mainly because he didn't sign on for this. Qui-Gon Jinn was going to teach Anakin, and it's only because of his master's unfortunate death that he stepped in and took over. He's not quite sure what he's doing, he's not sure how to connect with Anakin, and what I particularly liked about Bear's portrayal of Obi-Wan is that he got some of the nuances of Obi-Wan's character. Obi-Wan hates ritual. There's a part of Obi-Wan that's still a teenage boy who loves ships, even though there's also a little part of him that doesn't really want to fly them either. And he's so desperate to connect with Anakin and steer him on the right path, especially if he's the chosen one, but he has absolutely no idea how to go about that properly. We also have some brief interactions with other Jedi. We meet Master Thracia Leem, who starts this whole mission. She's a little bit of an oddball character. All the other Jedi like her a lot, but she's had kids, she's been married multiple times, and in the end she just leaves the Jedi Order, but she's not counted among the Lost 20. This is another bit where we just didn't have that continuity in place yet. The Lost 20, and I think a lot of the rules about Jedi attachments wouldn't really come into play until Attack of the Clones, so while she's a little odd, it doesn't fit in with the prequel era once we get further into the timeline. She's still interesting, and I like how she's able to connect with Anakin so much easier than Obi-Wan is, perhaps because she has so much more experience with children. We're also introduced to Vergere, one of her past Padawans, who went to Zonama Seacoast and has not been heard from since. I say introduced, but we never actually meet Vergere. She's completely gone by the time they arrive. They get a message from her at one point that explains what happened. But at this point, I believe the introduction we'll get in Agents of Chaos Heroes Trial is a lot more complete than it is here. And we meet a number of native Seacoastans, although I'm not sure if they're native because they are actually aliens from other worlds. Both are near-human species. One of them, they're red. One of them, they're blue. They're okay. We have a very interesting worm-like alien who ferries them out to Zonama Seacoast and is, I guess, a go-between between the Jedi and other people. And he was very interesting. Again, a new alien we've never seen before with this weird ecosystem in place on his ship that Obi-Wan is like, well, it's not our place to judge, but Anakin, having grown up a slave, is really worried that the food kid are being abused or misused in some way. We have a brief sighting, so to speak, of the Yuuzhan Vong, but like with Vergere, it's not a sighting at all. They're gone before the story even starts. They're called the Far Outsiders. They arrived, they attacked the planet, and Vergere was able to persuade them to stop, to take them with her so she could learn more about them. Unlike the actual introduction of her character, it's not really setting anything up that we don't already know from Vector Prime. And then we have our true baddies, Tarkin and Raith Sienar. Raith Sienar is an interesting character because I believe this is the only book where he appeared, but he's mentioned over and over again in other materials. He's the owner of a great shipyards. Like Tarkin, he comes from an aristocratic family, but unlike Tarkin, he's not obsessed with brute force. Tarkin tricks him into going to Zonama Seacoast. Sienar basically just wants one of those living ships of his own to study and dissect and understand. Tarkin, meanwhile, is just concerned with power. This is a planet that has these amazing ships. He wants that And it's pretty much a disaster for both of them. Things are not going well for Sienar, mainly because of Tarkin's interference. And then things don't go well for Tarkin either because Zonama Seacoat gets the heck out of Dodge before he can subdue them and take them over. So, stylistically, there is no set rule that say a book has to be 300 pages and must contain 20 chapters. But in Rogue Planet, Bear made some very interesting stylistic choices that I sort of took issue with. Rogue Planet is not particularly long. It's about 340 pages, but it contains 67 chapters and a coda. The first chapter is long, and there's a lot going on. Anakin is secretly in this flying garbage race thing. It's 29 pages. There's a lot of completely new concepts. I found it hard to visualize how this race worked and what the equipment used was. But then every chapter that follows that is significantly shorter, to the extent that some chapters are 1 page or 2 pages. Normally, when you're reading a book and you get to the end of a POV section, especially if it's a viewpoint section that was only a few pages, the author will then do a scene break and switch over to someone else's point of view. But in Rogue Planet, every time we got a new point of view, we got a new chapter. So it just made the pace feel very choppy because sometimes you'd be reading and the chapter would be 12 pages long and then the next chapter would be 1 page. And it led to me rereading those short chapters to make sure that I wasn't missing stuff, which I did not feel inclined to do with the long chapters at all. I also felt like once Anakin and Obi-Wan arrived on Zonama Seacoat, the narrative became hyper-obsessed with them building their own spaceship, and it lost focus on the reason they were there to begin with, which was to find out what happened to Vergere. They don't do any investigating. Anakin brings up, should we ask them about Vergere? And Obi-Wan repeatedly says, it's not the time for that. And they never actually ask anyone about her. The only reason they find out her fate is because Seacoat, the living conscious of the planet, tells Anakin about it through the ship. If this were a mystery and they were detectives, they've pretty much failed at their job. And I also had to wonder, Vergere went off to this mysterious world with billions of credits to buy her own custom organic ship. And then when no one's heard from her for a while, the Jedi Council send Anakin and Obi-Wan off, also with billions of credits, to build their own custom ship just so they can find out what happens to her. That's an awful lot of money. When Jedi go on business trips, do they just travel expense everything? Does the Jedi Council and the Senate reimburse all these crazy charges? Because this is insane. I also felt like the end, perhaps because of the way the chapters were structured to be so short, got unbelievably chaotic. There's a lot of things happening. There's bombs, there's ships, there's Anakin killing this blood carver. There's Obi-Wan trying to get to him, and the daughter of the Magister, and then revelations that the planet is alive, and it's a lot going on, and it's hard to keep straight, and it ends very abruptly, which I wasn't so much a fan of either. So to circle around to some of the many questions I had, manuscripts are usually turned in months before the book's actual publication date. So when Bear was writing Rogue Planet, he didn't know anything about what was going to come next. The first complete draft of the screenplay for Attack of the Clones wasn't even completed by George Lucas and Jonathan Hales until June of 2002. So while there's loads of references to Phantom Menace, events from Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan is still using Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber and hasn't constructed his own, there's not very much fleshing out of the prequel era. Likewise, the little we find out about the far outsiders is just things that you could have gleaned from Vector Prime. So Rogue Planet, in a way, felt like one of the Bantam era books to me. There were some very cool ideas, there were a lot of new alien species, and particularly this new alien world, but there wasn't a lot of cohesion for the greater story that was being told in Star Wars. And frankly, the things we find out about Zonama Seacoat in this book are pretty much overwritten in the Force Heretic trilogy in 2003. Seacoat says that she just recently gained consciousness, but as we'll find out from later NJO books, that's not what later authors decided on. So, in short, Rogue Planet is a strange little book. We don't learn anything about Anakin's training or the state of the galaxy at large. And while we do get a number of references to the Yuuzhan Vong, they're more like Easter eggs than new information. While I really like Bear's characterization of Obi-Wan, and to a lesser extent, some of the things he did with Anakin, there is, in the end, an awful lot of weirdness here. So, next time I will be reading the second book in the Dark Tide duology by Michael A. Stackpole, Dark Tide Ruin. You look it back down. Come on. Rogue Planet. Well, if you're not going to stay, I'm going to get another pillow.